Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Pearson. I'm a legal, political, and cultural analyst on television and radio, and I'm also a social science researcher. So I'm going to talk to you today about polls because I have been posting all over the place that polls are shit and the methodology is shit. And I can't do justice in a tweet to explain this, so I'm doing a video. I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can, but I want you to understand this, so I'm not going to cut corners. But I really think it's important that you understand how polling works because polling is misleading. It's not done well. It's a for-profit industry, and we need to make sure that the American public understands it. Because every time we have an election, because the polls were wrong. Why were they so wrong? Okay, because they're shit and the methodology is shit. Let me explain why. All right. There are two kinds of research methods. There is technically. One is quantitative, one is qualitative. Quantitative research is where we are trying to gather a data set, where we are trying to get something that is observable or knowable in numbers. So we can quantify it, quantitative research. Qualitative research is where we are trying to understand people's opinions and feelings and lived experience. That is done through focus groups, through structured interviews, through semi-structured interviews. There's a whole completely different research method for that. And it's important to understand that there's technically a third kind, which is a mixed methods research design, where you use both of them. When you do that, you have to take your qualitative research sample from your quantitative research sample. You can't just go out and gather another whole group of people, okay? And you also have to code what they say, and that's a special process. We're not going to get into that. So I want you to take this and go to that, okay? We're going to talk about quantitative research. The first thing that you need is you need a question. What's your research question? And so we're going to pick an easy one. Who will you vote for in the general election? Something that we would all like to know right now. So we have to design a study. That's all a poll is. It's a very poorly designed study. So the first thing we need to know is, who are we trying to get this information from? Who's our population? I'm going to pick the state of California. That's where I live. So there are 22,077,333 registered voters. When you see polls, I want you to look and see if they have likely voters or registered voters. Registered voters is a bigger group than likely voters, and a survey, a poll, will have to narrow that down. So it will ask you, are you a registered voter? And then it will ask you, are you likely to vote in the general election? If you say no, you get booted out of the survey. If you say yes, you keep going. That's important to understand. Who are they trying to understand or measure? There's a way of doing that. It's called a sample design. You need to figure out, first of all, how are you going to do it? Are you going to do what's called clustering, which is you're going to break it up into groups and then sort of gather that data separately because it's impractical to get? Or are you going to do something else, which is the opposite of that, which is to just do it all at once? All right. There is how you're going to decide your sample. So how do we pick from that population of 22 million who we're going to contact? One way is a random sample where you take everybody who's a registered voter in the state of California and you pluck them out of a hat and you call. Another way is a systemic random sample where you take the list and you go 1, 2, 3, I'm going to call the third person. 1, 2, 3, I'm going to call the third person. 1, 2, 3, I'm going to call the third person. And you have to make sure you do that accurately in order for it to be valid. Then there's something called a convenience sample, which is the worst kind of sampling. And it is the person that you're sampling is based on convenience or availability. I'll leave you to your own conclusions about how maybe some of these polling organizations are doing things. Then the next most important thing I want you to look for is that sample stratified? Stratified, I want you to think of as sort of a pastry, like a croissant. It has layers. Well, your population has layers too. It has all different characteristics of people. It has men, it has women, it has people who are non-binary, it has people who have different sexual orientations, different ages, different races, different ethnicities. And so if you really want to get an accurate picture of what the electorate is going to do, you need to have a stratified sample because there's a whole lot of different people out there, right? If we just target white men, we're only going to know what white men think. And they don't tell us that. They don't tell us that that's what that number actually represents. Okay. Now, sometimes they do. They say, okay, among Black voters, this is what this is. Okay. But again, it has to be done in relation to the population. So if your survey sample, your polling sample is stratified, it has to be in the same proportion as the population. And I am picking random numbers here. If the state of California is 50% female, then your survey sample, your polling sample must be 50% female. Otherwise, it's not valid. So how do we figure out how big that sample size is? Just the sample size itself. Because there's 22 million in California, right? We use a calculator. And all of the calculators do it the same way. They're all the same thing. But there's some concepts that you need to know and understand in order to understand the calculator. First thing you need is the population size. I've told you that. That's 22,077,333 people. So you plug that number in. Then what you need to know is your confidence level, which is how confident do you want to be about the result that you get being accurate? The gold standard for just sort of standard research is 95%. And that's good if you're doing market research and you're trying to figure out whether somebody likes Oreo cookies or not, right? Little risk there. But if we're talking about the presidency and we're putting this information out into the world, do you want them to be 95% sure? Or maybe you want them to be 99% sure? We don't know that when they release that data. Look at the little bits of pieces of information in the teeny tiny print, which, by the way, would violate like advertising laws in the state of New York. Because I used to work for the New York Attorney General's office, and I used to have to check the size of the print. Look at the size of the print on that stuff and see if they've told you what their confidence level is. How confident are they that their results are actually accurate? Good question to ask. The other thing that you need to know is something called a margin of error, and that is a percentage. So the way that you understand confidence level and margin of error is we are 95% sure that the result that we got is within 2% of a margin of error. So we could be 2% wrong. It could be 2% either way. That's really important to understand. Because when you start looking at these numbers, it makes you question the reliability of these numbers, right? We don't know their confidence level. So it could be 80% for all the hell we know. It could be 75%. It could be 25%. We don't know. And the margin of error is important then as well. So if you're 88% sure that this is going to be accurate within 2%, you just gave me trash for information. It doesn't really help us understand anything at all. And you want to ask yourself, why aren't they giving us that information? Why aren't they telling us what that confidence level is? Why aren't they telling us that information? Something we need to be asking. I wonder if there's a group of people that could do that. Journalists. I don't know. Anyway, so Here's what I want you to think about is when we calculate this using a calculator, we've got the population size, we've got the confidence level, and we've got the margin of error that we want to be within. They can actually pick that. If you look at the calculator, it'll give you a 5% margin of error as a standard. You want that to be low. You can also do it in reverse, which is I'm just going to pick, my sample size, and then I'm going to plug it in backwards, and it'll give you your margin of error, and it oftentimes is a much bigger number. So thinking about this, if I want to be 95% certain that I am polling the registered voters who are part of my sample in the state of California, and I want to be 95% certain that it's within 2% of the margin of error. So 95% certain that what we got was within 2% correct. Then what I need to do is I need to survey 2,401 people. The surveys that you're seeing or the polls that you're seeing are tiny numbers. If I want to be within 1% of that margin of error, I need to have 9,600 people. Now, that's for 95%. If I want 99% certainty, then for 2%, I'm going to have to poll 4,160. And for 1%, I'm going to have to poll 16,629 people. Look at these survey results and see, or these polling results, and see that they're not doing that. What they're doing is a lot of them are doing percentages of population. They're saying, okay, we're going to do 10%, and we're going to call that accurate. What I am telling you is that look in any research methods book, and it will tell you that that is not accurate. It is bad research design, and frankly, it is scientifically invalid. At the end of the day, you need to understand what you're looking at. What did they measure? How did they decide who they picked? What method did they use? Is it stratified? Does it actually represent the population in that area? What's the population size? What confidence level did they pick? What's the margin of error? How accurate is this really? How big is that sample size? Did they just cut corners and use a percentage of the population? We need to understand how these things work. There's a little bit more to it, but that's the basics. So I hope that this helps you understand why I say polls are shit. The methodology is shit. The polls you're generally seeing are garbage. And I look at donations myself. I look at how much money are people donating, what's the grassroots effort? And look at the grassroots numbers. You can actually find those. You can go to the FEC and you can look up each presidential candidate and see who's donating and who isn't. And how much money they have in their coffers and how much money they're collecting. And that's why they announce that stuff to the public. I think that that's a good indicator of how a campaign is doing during a period. If you recall, when it came to President Biden after that debate, he actually surged in grassroots support. To me, that speaks volumes. So be smart consumers of information. Know what you're looking at and ask questions. Figure it out. Is it a bot poll? Is it a push poll? Is it trying to manipulate you? Was it done correctly? How accurate is it? I just gave you all the information that you need to know in order to answer those questions. I will chat with you soon.